Hi guys, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep, and we are looking at question number 31 from the OG 13th edition Critical Reasoning chapter. Um, so the stimulus says Furber's syndrome, a viral disease that frequently affects cattle, is transmitted to these animals through infected feed. Even though chickens commercially raised for meat are often fed the type of feed identified as the source of infection in cattle, so chicken are also given the same feed, Furber syndrome is only rarely observed in chickens. Interesting. So cattle is getting Furber syndrome by eating that feed, whereas chicken are not getting the Furber syndrome by eating the same feed. This fact, however, does not indicate that most chickens are immune to the virus that causes Furber's syndrome, since, now this is interesting. The argument goes on to say that even though chicken are not contracting Furber's syndrome, this does not mean that the chicken are immune to the syndrome. So then what goes in the blank has to be some kind of an explanation for why are these chicken not contracting Furber syndrome despite not being immune to it. That is basically what we are required to explain in this particular argument. So, okay, let's go to the options. Let's take a look. So, A says chickens and cattle are not the only kinds of farm animal that are typically fed the type of feed liable to be contaminated with the virus that causes Furber syndrome. Our scope is limited to chicken and cattle. We are not bothered about any other farm animal, so A immediately goes out. B says Furber's syndrome has been found in animals that have not been fed the type of feed liable to be contaminated with the virus that can cause the disease. That is okay. All this means is there could be some other way also of contracting the syndrome apart from the feed. But it still doesn't explain why the chicken are not contracting Furber syndrome despite having the same feed which is causing Furber syndrome in cattle. C says resistance to some infectious organisms such as the virus that causes Furber syndrome can be acquired by exposure to a closely related infectious organism. That's okay, but still doesn't explain why the chicken are not contracting Furber syndrome. D says chickens and cattle take more than a year to show symptoms of Furber syndrome, and chickens commercially raised for meat, unlike cattle, are generally brought to market during the first year of life. That gives you a perfect explanation for why chicken are not showing symptoms of Furber syndrome, because it takes 1 year for the symptoms to manifest themselves, and before that 1 year is over, the chicken are typically brought to market and eaten. So how will the symptoms appear? The D should be the answer to the question. We will look at E also. E says the type of feed liable to be infected with the virus that causes Furber's syndrome generally constitutes a larger proportion of the diet of commercially raised chickens than of commercially raised cattle. So all the more reason that the chicken should have contracted this syndrome, but it did not. So what is the explanation for that? D gives us the explanation, and that should be the answer to the question. On a difficulty of 1 to 5, I would give this one a 3. Have a nice day.